Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Renee Worth, Executive Vice President of League Services and MCUL SC at the Michigan Credit Union League.
Thank you. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Kyle Scheele. Kyle has the knack for turning the unconventional into the extraordinary, from hosting a Viking funeral for the regrets of 21,000 people to staging the world's first fake marathon. Over the past decade, his innovative endeavors have been featured in major outlets like Fast Company, Wired, and the Washington Post, just to name a few. His videos have amassed over 250 million views, and he's inspired hundreds of thousands of audiences members over the United States. Today, Kyle is here to share his story and encourage all of us to chase our own crazy ideas and become the people we were meant to be. So please join me in welcoming Kyle Scheele.
Hi, thank you. Hello. I want to tell you guys a story. The year is 2003. The setting is the small town of Rogersville, Missouri. I'm 17 years old, and I'm in a bit of a pickle. I need some money to be able to do the things that high school seniors want to do. I want to go to basketball games. I want to buy new shoes. I want to take my girlfriend on dates. Do I technically have a girlfriend in this story? No. Do I have any prospects on the horizon? That's not important. We're getting off the subject of the story. The important thing is that I need money. But as we all know, time is money, and I have no time. I've got a full class schedule. I'm applying to colleges. I'm student body president. I have extracurricular activities. And between all these different things, I just don't really have time to get a part-time job. And so I get this crazy idea that in order to raise a little bit of spending cash, I'm going to start a business. And this business will consist of me designing and selling the dumbest t-shirts that you can possibly imagine to my even dumber friends. So I borrow a laptop from one of these friends and I fire up his copy of Adobe Illustrator and I use it to design my first masterpiece. It was an ivory colored shirt, and across the chest it proudly proclaimed this timeless truth that we all know: osteoporosis is bad to the bone. There it is. I print this shirt onto a standard piece of 8.5 by 11 inch paper using our school's computer lab. That was a cost savings measure for my fledgling operation. And then I jumped headlong into the world of sales, just going table to table in the cafeteria saying, "Excuse me, you look like a man of fashion. You look like a woman of fashion. Would you like to buy one of these shirts?" Inevitably, the question was raised, "Well, Kyle, how much are the shirts?" Got to tell you, I failed to anticipate that question. But I thought quickly on my feet and I said, you know what, normally they're $17, but for you today, they're $15. And before I know it, someone gave me $15 of cold hard cash, and they told me their size, and then someone else did that. And pretty soon I have this handwritten sheet of orders and a pile of cash, much like the early credit unions I just learned. It was a basement operation and one desk and a little safety box. And I had enough to meet our local screen printing shop's MOQ. I had no idea what those letters meant, so I Googled them, and I found out they stood for minimum order quantity. And I had a business now. And so I took the money from that first shirt, and I poured it back into the next shirt, and the next shirt, and the next shirt. Shirts like, "Friends don't let friends watch friends." Can we get the slides up? Yeah, there we go. It's an important one. "Name calling is for sissies." And, of course, "Lyme disease ticks me off." And things are going great. I'm a titan of industry now. I'm no longer dealing with MOQs. Now I'm learning about economies of scale. I'm learning about inventory management and cost of goods sold. And I'm Googling, can a 17-year-old be charged as an adult for sales tax evasion? You know, business. And then one day, disaster strikes. I'm sitting in my homeroom class and working on my latest design, and a voice comes on over the intercom. "Kyle Scheele, please report to the principal's office." This is my principal. I put that slide up there, and it still scares me a little bit. 20 years later, I still have a visceral reaction to this man. This is John Hetherington, my high school principal. And he says the words you always want to hear your principal say. I walk into his office and he says, "Kyle, why don't you shut the door?" So I shut the door and I sort of just slink into a chair, and he goes, "Mr. Scheele, I understand you've become something of a fashion icon." And I laugh nervously, and he says, "Listen, honestly, I love it. I love the hustle. I love the drive. I love the entrepreneurial spirit. I love that you have this thing that you've created that you're pouring yourself into. I love all of it. I even love the shirts, Kyle. I think they're very funny. There is one problem, though, Kyle. As a principal, you have to understand I can't have you running a business on school grounds. And of course, we all know this is true. If you've ever worked with young people, you know the rule. If you let one kid do something, no matter how innocent that thing is, then every other kid thinks that they get to do whatever they want as well. And so he can let me run my little t-shirt company, but if he does that, we all know the next step, drug cartels take over the whole school, right? You have to draw a line somewhere, and the reasonable place to draw that line is obviously silly t-shirts. And I said, Mr. Hetherington, you're absolutely right. I cannot, nay, I shall not be running a business on these hallowed school grounds. And he looked surprised that I was giving up so easily, but I think he was pleased, and he was like, well, Kyle, thank you. I'm glad that we had this conversation. I'm glad we can see eye to eye. And I said, one follow-up question, Mr. H. Where exactly do school grounds end? Next day, we're back in business, baby. With one small change to the business plan, now whenever someone wants to buy a t-shirt from me, we'll make arrangements in the school cafeteria or in class or in the hallway, but the actual transaction will take place after school. We'll walk out to the parking lot, I'll get the t-shirt out of my car, you'll get your money, and then we will walk to the edge of the parking lot, to the edge of Farm Road 194. We will look both ways for safety, and then once the coast is clear, we will step into the street, and we'll complete the transaction just inches off of school property. To his credit, he did say, and this is a direct quote, "As long as you don't get hit by a car, it's okay by me." Wise words from a wise man. Well, I think we've put all this behind us and everything seems to be going great. We've reached a little bit of an understanding, and then one day I find out that that is not true because I show up to school and I'm told, Kyle, you can't come in. You're no longer welcome on campus. You are not allowed to attend classes. You're not allowed to participate in extracurricular activities. In fact, we have removed your name as a student from our rolls. You are no longer welcome here. And I was like, whoa, guys, there seems to be some misunderstanding. I'm sure we can figure this out. Like, what happened? What did I do? And they go, buddy, you graduated. You can't keep coming back here, man. It's time for you to leave the nest. And I said, that's easy for you to say. All my customers are in that building. And they said, that sounds like a you problem. And it was a me problem. So I scrambled and I thought, you know what? I'm kind of done selling these t-shirts in ones and twos. It's time for me to take the next step. And so I set my sights on retail, specifically on a store called Urban Outfitters. In my mind, Urban Outfitters was the peak of teen retail. This is where the coolest kids bought the coolest clothes. This is where my customers were. This is where my t-shirts belonged. There was one problem. Urban Outfitters did not share my excitement about this idea. I remember I called their corporate headquarters in Philadelphia. I found their number on the internet. I called. This woman answers the phone, and she says, Urban Outfitters, how may I direct your call? And I said, yes, I would love to speak with someone in your buying department, please. And she said, do you have a specific name? I said, I sure do. My name is Kyle. I'd love to speak with someone in your buying department, as I was saying. She said, no, I need the specific name of someone in the buying department. And I was like, lady, that seems like something you should know. But I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. Just push one of those buttons. I'll figure it out. And she was like, no, sir, I know the names of the people in the buying department. I need to know if you know the names. And we just have a very small team of these people, and they're very busy all the time. And we could really take up all their calls, or all their time with calls like this. And we don't mean to be elitist, but it's sort of a don't call us, we'll call you situation. I was disappointed, but also undeterred. And I said, how about this? How about I will send you some of my shirts. You take a look. I'll overnight them to you. You'll have them tomorrow. I'll mail them right to your desk, your name on it. You take a look. Have a look-see. See how they feel. Notice how soft they are. Notice the smiles on the faces of people around town as you wear them around. And then when you love these shirts, and I'm confident that you will, then would you do me a favor and show them to your specifically named buyers that you keep mentioning? And she said, sir, unfortunately, as we can't do that either. As a company, Urban Outfitters has a very strict policy. We do not accept unsolicited packages. And the reasonable thing to do in that situation, I think we can all agree, is just to hang up the phone, stop wasting this woman's time, and give up on this idea. It's an idea that's not going to work. And I did 2 out of 3 of those things. I hung up the phone, I stopped wasting her time, and I was about to give up on this dream entirely, but then I remembered a story that my dad told me when I was just a little boy. A story of another man, and this man too had been told, we do not accept unsolicited packages. But this man thought, if the package is compelling enough, they might be forced to accept it just out of curiosity alone. And so inspired by this man's story, I began to construct a large wooden horse. That's not true. Actually, I got a suitcase. Suitcase was more in the budget. And so I got a suitcase and I filled it with my t-shirts, each just the best sellers, my favorites, each one's folded perfectly so the design faced up when you open the suitcase. On top of all of it, I put a vintage pair of corduroy Levi's. Except when you picked up the pair of pants, they opened up into a book. And inside was our entire catalog, all of our pricing and contact information, the company story, the whole 9 yards. I put all of that into the suitcase, I closed it up, and then like Miriam sending Moses down the Nile, I just dropped this basket of my hopes and dreams into the river of the United States Postal Service. And then I waited. About a week went by, and one day my phone rang, and I said, "Hello, this is Kyle." And a voice on the other end said, "Kyle, my name is Don. I work for Urban Outfitters." And I said, "Don, that is a specific name." I said, "Don, what can I do for you?" And he said, "Kyle, your suitcase is sitting on my desk." And I said, "Interesting, Don. Sounds like you do accept unsolicited packages." He laughed and he said, "We made an exception for you, Kyle. Honestly, we love these shirts and we think they'd be a great fit for our stores." And so fast forward a little bit, and these shirts, these admittedly very silly, very dumb shirts that came out of the even dumber ideas in my head and my heart, these shirts were now being sold at Urban Outfitters stores all across the United States. But they were also sold at one other Urban Outfitters store. One store that to me was more important than all the ones in this country because this one store happened to be in Toronto. And that was the one store that allowed me to begin introducing myself to girls at college parties as Kyle Scheele, international fashion designer. I'm so grateful for that story. I'm grateful that it happened, but I'm really more grateful for when it happened because I think it happened at a really crucial moment for me. See, I believe that all of us, every person in this room, but also every person on this planet, came into this world with tremendous creative gifts. If you don't believe me, just go into a kindergarten classroom and ask how many of you are artists and watch as every hand flies into the air. But then come back and ask that question in first grade, and then ask it in second grade and in third grade. And as the years go up, the hands come down, don't they? And I don't know why that is, but I think it has to do with pressure that builds from the outside. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, that pressure builds from the inside too, doesn't it? Pressure to be realistic, pressure to be reasonable, pressure to pick a goal that's maybe like a little bit more achievable. And right as that pressure was building to its peak for me, my senior year of high school, and having to decide about college and career and student loans and where am I going to go and all this kind of stuff, all of a sudden I have this experience with Urban Outfitters, and now I have this concrete evidence that sometimes the most reasonable thing you can do is just to chase the craziest idea that you can. So that's what I've been doing ever since. And over the last 20 years or so, I've chased a lot of crazy ideas, and I've learned a lot of things from both the failures and the successes. And I think that the things that I've learned can help all of us, because I don't believe those creative capacities you had as a kid went away. I think they got covered up. And I think that if we can uncover them, we'll uncover latent creative capacity to solve not only the problems that you heard about this morning on this stage already, but the problems that are going to come up that you don't expect, both in your industry, in your own personal business, and your family life, and your community, and ultimately in our world. Here are a few of the ideas that I've chased along the way. So about 10 years ago, there was a book. Some of you will remember this book. It was very popular, but it was also very controversial. It was like flying off the shelves at the same time as it was being boycotted. That book, of course, was called 50 Shades of Grey. If there's any pervy soccer moms in here, you probably read it. Or pervy soccer dads, that's fine. It's not my place to judge. I did not read the book, but I also didn't find the book controversial for the same reason that everyone else did. People found that book controversial because it had a lot of explicit content in it. I actually found it controversial not for what was in the book, but for what they left out. See, as an artist, I happen to know there are way more than 50 shades of gray. In fact, in the art world, there's a thing known as grayscale. Grayscale goes from 0 to 100. 0 in grayscale is white, 100 is black. And that means that 1 through 99 are, by definition, shades of gray. And I thought, if there's 99 of these bad boys out there, and they're only showing us 50? What are they trying to hide, right? Somebody needs to blow the lid off this story, and that somebody's going to be me. And so I decided to publish my own book, a tell-all book, and that book was called 99 Shades of Grey. I cannot stress this enough. The content of this book was literally just 99 different shades of gray. That was it. That was the whole book. Like the book that inspired it, this book started out light, but it did get pretty dark by the end. That's not even the dumbest joke in this talk, so buckle up. I put this onto a website called Kickstarter.com, and Kickstarter is a crowdfunding website, and I said, I need to raise $600. I had bargained with a printer to get down to $600, and I said, I need to raise $600 to print this book, and if you give me $10, I'll give you a copy of the book. If you give me $15, you can name one of the shades of gray. But honestly, I gotta tell you, I didn't think we were gonna raise a single dollar. I thought no one's actually gonna buy this book. I remember emailing my friends right before I launched the project, and I said, hey guys, just so you know, I'm sure you guys are having like conversations about an intervention or something. I also know this is a bad idea. I also know this is not going to work. I just think it's a funny story that I'll be able to tell later on. Well, I was right and I was wrong. It was a funny story to tell, but it didn't fail. In the end, we slightly overshot our $600 goal, and we ended up raising $9,944 from 431, let's call them what they are, idiots, okay? Around the world who gave me money for this project. And these idiots lived in 12 different countries. So we had to navigate international shipping laws and fill out customs forms to mail this dumb joke all over the world. And then we also put a copy of the book in the Library of Congress. Because I don't know if you know this, but that's a thing that you can do as a United States citizen. Over and over again, I found that when you chase crazy ideas, they often go bigger than you expect. So I want to tell you about one more real quick. This is my friend Grant. And when I look at these pictures up here, my heart breaks a little bit, because what I see here is what a lot of you see, a man throwing his life away. Marathon running, right? Seriously, of all the ways you can spend your one life on this planet. And as you can see, Grant wasn't content to ruin his own life. He wants everyone else to be in his downward spiral. This is what happens with these people. And his poor wife got sucked into it. And then even sadder than that, he tried to get me involved. I mean, every time I would have coffee or lunch with Grant, he would be like, Kyle, when are you going to do it, man? When are you going to do it? And I was like, when am I going to do what, Grant? He would go, when are you going to run a marathon? I would go, oh, Grant, my friend, I have this car, you see. And I bought it so I don't have to run everywhere like an idiot, all right? And Grant was like, dude, no, you got to do it. It's so fun. It's so much fun. Like, can you believe that? It's so much fun. These people will lie straight to your face. It's so much fun. I was like, Grant, that's a lie, dude. He's like, okay, fun maybe is the wrong word. But it's just so cool to be able to say that you've done it. I mean, what a cool thing to be able to say that you've run a marathon. And I was like, oh, okay. Then I'll say that I've run a marathon. That's the best part of it. That's easy. He was like, well, Kyle, no one's going to believe you. And I was like, you're right. No one will believe me. How do I get them to believe me? And so just as kind of a thought exercise, I was like, what would it take for someone to believe that I've run a marathon? And I realized it would only take 3 things. Number 1, physical proof. If you look at those pictures of Grant, if we can get those back up there, he's got medals and race bibs and T-shirts and swag, right? And I'm going to keep pointing over here, and eventually it's going to come. There it is. Look at that. It's magic. And all of these things, like some of those race bibs will have his name printed on the race bib. Like he was definitely there. And if you're not familiar with marathon culture, the reason they give you all this stuff is then you hang it in the entryway of your home as sort of like a display of dominance over your friends and your guests. So when they come in, they feel worse about themselves. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to say I run a marathon, I got to fake some of that stuff. Like, that seems doable. And then second, photographic proof. Every marathon runner has a picture of themselves about halfway through the race looking like they are just on death's door, right? They're emaciated. They're like trying to stand up straight, but they can't. And they're trying to smile, but their glycogen stores are just totally depleted. So their muscles aren't firing properly. They look wet and also somehow dry at the same time. And it's just the saddest picture you've ever seen, but boy, are they proud of that thing, aren't they? So I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to find a way to fake that picture. That seems doable. And then last but not least, social proof, right? If I tell you that I ran the Michigan Credit Union League marathon, and you're like, I've never heard of that, and it's not on the website or whatever, like you're gonna be suspicious. And so I thought, okay, physical proof, photographic proof, social proof. None of those things require any running. And so I had this idea. I'm going to start the world's first fake marathon. Now, the idea was pretty simple. It starts, step 1, you give me money. That's actually where most of my ideas start. Hey, that's where most of your ideas start, too, if you're honest. And step 2, then I will give you all the stuff that you get from a regular marathon. I'll send you a race bib with your name printed right on it. You don't even have to run. I'll send you a T-shirt. I'll send you a medal. I will ship that stuff right to your door. You don't even have to walk down to the mailbox, okay? No steps required. Boom, physical proof accomplished. For photographic proof, you'll help me out with that one. We'll all go outside on the same day at the same time, put on our bibs, and then take pictures of ourselves, this is important, pretending to run, okay? Not actually running. That's not a part of this. Maybe spritz some water on your face so you look a little sweaty like that guy in your video. Maybe, think of like the saddest memory from your childhood, so like you're really in the mindset, you know, and then snap a picture of yourself and then upload that to social media. That will start to develop some social proof, because you'll click on the hashtag, you'll see all these other people in the same race bib running the same race. You're like, oh, this starts to look like a real race. But to really nail down the social proof, we put up a website. And on that website, there was like a course map and race description and sponsorship opportunities. You never know. And then last but not least, at the end of the day, you could log in and see your race time. How did you do? How fast were you? Now, I actually don't know how long it takes to run a marathon, and so I just Googled it, and I found someone had uploaded a spreadsheet of all the New York Marathon finishing times, which these are like world-class times, and I was like, this is perfect. And the great thing about a spreadsheet, as you all know, is that if you click on the column that says runner name, you just delete that column, and then you just put your names in there, and then you're good to go. And in a blatant cash grab, the more money that you gave me, the better your time was. And I called this race Run Free because it was run free. There was no running involved. It was completely free of running. And I put this up on Kickstarter trying to raise $1,000, and we just slightly overshot our goal, and we ended up raising $23,098 from 592, let's call them what they are, heroes, okay? And these 592 heroes actually represented over 1,000 runners, because a lot of them bought team registrations where they would run with their friends or their family or their coworkers. And that was super helpful because it made the pictures more convincing, because we had pictures of like a whole group of people about to cross the finish line, people stretching out before the race, people at the finish line. And the one problem, though, was that a marathon's only 26 miles, 26.2, and these people lived in 24 different countries. And so our marathon somehow managed to go underneath the Eiffel Tower, in front of Big Ben, across the Golden Gate Bridge, Gyeongbokgung Palace, the Yale University Art Gallery, the state capital of Utah, and we finished up, of course, at Disneyland. Towards the end of the campaign, I got a call from this business, and they said, hey, we would love to sponsor this race. And I was like, listen, we need to make sure we're on the same page here. And they said, no, we get it, we love it, we want to be a part of it. And so it became Groupon Presents Run Free, the greatest race that never was. But that wasn't the best phone call that I got. The best phone call I got was from these guys, Runner's World Magazine. And they said, hey, we would love to feature your fake race in our real magazine. And I said, absolutely you would. I would love that too. Send me anything you want, I'll sign it, I won't even read it. That's how bad I want this. So they did, and I did, and then I buried that secret just deep in my heart until a couple months later, the day that issue hit newsstands. And when I had like the print edition of Runner's World magazine with my fake race in it in my hands, I called Grant. And I was like, Grant, buddy, hey, it's Kyle, quick question. How many marathons have you run now? And he was like, well, between marathons and half marathons, probably like 15 or 20. And I was like, wow, that's a lot. Follow-up question, Grant. How many times have you been in Runner's World magazine? And Grant goes, oh, dude, I've never been in Runner's World magazine. I go, oh, fascinating. I have. Click. All of this stuff, again, started with this. With a t-shirt that said osteoporosis is bad to the bone. And the reason I tell all those stories is because I want to remind you that this is where it started. And that really it started before this. It started with a situation where I needed money and I didn't have time. It started with a constraint. And the reason I tell all those stories is because it illustrates a point that I think oftentimes gets left out of discussions about creativity. There's this thing that people say about creativity and creative people. I've had it said about me a lot of times. They say, Kyle's, oh man, you're really an outside-the-box thinker. Kyle, you really think outside the box. And this is, I apologize in advance, this is my most obnoxious slide. I put like every single animation that I could on there just to drive the point home. We think that creativity means thinking outside, wait for it, look, this is so dumb. I just wasted a minute. I'm like, that's first of all dumb and unreadable mostly, but it's also not true. That's not true, that creativity means thinking outside the box. Thinking outside the box is actually easy and requires no creativity at all. If your boss comes to you and said, hey, we need this project done in the next 6 weeks, thinking outside the box is you going, how about, hear me out, what if we did it in the next 6 years? Huh? It's outside the box right there. What if we never did it at all? and I just kept getting paid, right? That's some outside the box thinking, and it's not gonna take you very far in your career. Outside the box thinking is easy. Real creativity requires thinking inside the box. Real creativity comes into play when you go, okay, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough team, I don't have enough budget, I don't have enough XYZ resource, but I still have to get this done. That's when creative thinking comes into play. And so that's what I want to talk to you about today. Especially in light of some of the stuff that we saw earlier, the political landscape, the legal landscape, these things that there's a lot of unknowns, both in your industry and also in our world at large. And the temptation in situations like that can be to wait, to go, let's let all of this settle down, and then we can start our new thing. Then we can start our innovation measures. Then we can try this new idea. The problem with that is that that's never going to happen. The world is never going to settle down to the point where you go, okay, now we feel really great about it. There's always going to be a reason to wait. There's always going to be a reason to say maybe a little bit later. And the truth is that the people who get things done, they work within the constraints that they have. And so I want to talk to you today about why constraints facilitate focus, or why they're beneficial. Number one is that constraints facilitate focus. The number one reason why constraints are beneficial is that they facilitate focus. When you have a resource-rich environment, it's easy to get what we like to call scope creep. And here's what scope creep looks like. You say, we need to develop a new product that does X, Y, and Z. And someone else goes, you know what? We kind of have a lot of money we're sitting on right now. Times are good. We're in a good spot. For just like 20% more, we could actually do A, B, and C too. And then we've got kind of the bookend, A, B, C, we've got X, Y, Z, and then someone else is like, you know what, I've always liked LMNOP. It's got kind of like a ba-da-da-da-da, LMNOP, kind of a rhythm to it. And then someone else is like, well, my name starts with an L, you know, but my wife's name starts with a G, so we've probably got to throw her in there too. And before you know it, you've got like half the alphabet in this project. You haven't even started yet. You've blown up the timeline, you've blown up the budget, and like that just keeps happening. And that's a recipe for two things. One, it's a recipe for something that probably never gets done, because that project just continues to evolve over time. It becomes just this like behemoth in the organization, and people keep changing it, and it keeps getting passed from one person to the next. But it also is a recipe for something that even if it does get done, probably doesn't ever get done very well. And when you have something that does a lot of things, it usually doesn't do any of those things particularly well. There's a reason why, like, a Swiss Army knife is an interesting thing. Nobody uses them on any sort of a regular basis. If somebody needs a knife, they have a standalone knife. If someone needs a corkscrew, they have a standalone corkscrew. A Swiss Army knife is like, hey, we'll throw it in the junk drawer. If we need it, great. That's a last case resort. But we do this with projects. But as soon as someone comes in and goes, you know what, hey, this thing has become unwieldy. We're cutting the team in half. Instead of 6 months, we have 6 weeks to get it done, and it's just you and one other person. Oh man, does that facilitate some focus, huh? Because all of a sudden you go, okay, well, ABC off the table, element of P, not going to happen. And you start even looking at like your original X, Y, Z, and you're like, okay, well, Z can wait, and Y, actually, really, we just need Y. Like X and Z aren't necessary. And that focus, and that it was not facilitated by the resource-rich environment. It was facilitated by the constraint. You go, we have to get this done. What are our priorities? Second reason why constraints are beneficial is that they require resourcefulness. When you have all the resources in the world, you don't have to be resourceful. You don't have to look for innovative ways to use them. You don't have to look for alternative resources. You don't have to look for new ways to use things. You just do the most obvious thing. But when you don't have that resource, all of a sudden you've got to get creative. When I was a kid, I had this cockatiel. And a cockatiel is like it's those little birds that have a big mohawk feather that sticks up in the front. They're gray, they have yellow cheeks. And I had one of these birds, and it lived in a cage in my sunroom in my parents' house. And I was sitting at breakfast one day, and my parents had all these bird feeders out in front of the house. I'm just eating a bowl of cereal, and I look up, and I see a cockatiel on the bird feeder. And I'm like, well, that's not good. How did this bird get out of its cage and out of the house and onto the bird feeder? But then I look over into that room, and my cockatiel is still in its cage. So I'm like, well, somebody's bird has escaped. They're not native to southern Missouri, as far as I know. And so I did the thing that you do in that situation. I just went, Mom! And my mom comes running down the stairs, and she's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, there's a cockatiel on the bird feeder. So we all, like as a family, we're going to rally, we're going to try to catch this bird and reunite it with its owner or whatever. And we all go outside, and everyone starts whistling. And they're just whistling and whistling, trying to get this bird to come. There was a problem, though. I didn't know how to whistle. I didn't learn to whistle until I was like 15. Now I can do it. Very good, but thank you. But at the time, I couldn't whistle. So everyone else is whistling, and I'm just standing there like, I found this bird, and I'm like feeling very useless right now. The thing was, the whistling wasn't working. The bird was not a fan. Most people are not a fan of whistling, especially when a bunch of people are whistling at the same time. There's some pitch issues that you're dealing with there. And so the bird flies from the bird feeder up into this tree. They all go underneath that tree. They continue whistling. The bird flies away again. Now it's like 80 yards away, probably 60 or 80 feet up in this very tall tree. And I know that if we keep doing this, like we're gonna lose this bird. And I'm standing there going, I don't know how to whistle. I don't know what to do. What should I do? And so I just thought, well, what do people say to birds? And I was like, there's only one thing I've ever heard anyone say to a bird, besides Polly want a cracker, but that feels like parrot specific. And I didn't want, cultural appropriation or parrots or whatever. I don't know how that relationship works. And so the only other thing I'd ever heard anyone say to a bird was pretty bird. And so I just went, pretty bird. And I swear to you, this bird from 80 yards away just soars straight towards me, lands right at my feet. We catch the bird, we reunite it with its owner. It was this whole crazy story. Here's the thing though. I didn't do that because I was like, no, I'm an artist. I'm gonna be creative. I'm not gonna do the thing everyone else is doing. No, I did it because I couldn't do what they did. And if I could have whistled, I would have stood there whistling with the rest of those idiots, and that bird would be God knows where right now. Constraints require resourcefulness. They require you to go, what else do I have? And so sometimes that's saying something instead of whistling, and sometimes it's going, hey, we don't have a budget for a new trade show display, but we do have 6 old trade show displays that are in a closet. Can we reskin those? We don't have new marketing materials, that we don't have the time and the team to develop those, but we do have a lot of old ones, and we have working files for those. Can we swap out the copy? Can we use these graphics? Can we reuse this? Can we have one of our team members who doesn't traditionally do this role pop in and do this role today? That's resourcefulness that is forced by constraints. The third reason why constraints are beneficial is that constraints inspire innovation. When you can't use something for the thing that you've always wanted to use it for, or you don't have that thing, then you get resourceful, and oftentimes that inspires some innovation. You end up going, oh, I didn't really think about this. And this is actually one that you can do to yourself. You can put constraints on yourself and just see what happens. So as a silly example, this is a tandem bicycle. I bought this at an antique store that was going out of business, and they gave me a deal that I couldn't refuse. And I threw it in the back of my truck. I drove it home, and I pull it out, and I set it up, and my wife is like, my sweet wife, she was like, oh my gosh, Kyle, you're so romantic. A bicycle built for 2. Like, we're going to go on little dates. We can ride through the park. We'll get a basket. We'll get a bell. We can have picnics. We can get ice cream. And I was just like, woman, what are you talking about? I didn't buy this for you and I to ride. I bought this because when I bought this bike, I looked at this and I saw the same thing that I know a lot of you saw, right? You looked at this bike and you thought, if you chop the back seat of that thing off and you put a horse's butt back there, well then, of course, then when you ride on the front of the bike, you'll look like a centaur. And now everywhere I ride, I'm the centaur of attention. Thank you. I told you there were worse jokes coming. That is the dumbest thing maybe that I've ever made. Maybe not. I don't know. But here's how I made that bike. I saw the bike and I thought, oh, this is interesting. What else could I do with it? What could I do that's not the most obvious thing to do with it? And that sometimes it can be interesting in brainstorming sessions to go, let's throw out the first 5 ideas that get thrown out on the table because those are probably the obvious ones. And then let's push beyond that. Or hey, instead of having the marketing team dream up the marketing, what if we had all the interns dream up the marketing? What if we had all of the people who know the least about this dream up this project? It doesn't mean we have to go with their idea, but sometimes just forcing your constraints also forces innovation. The fourth reason why constraints are beneficial is that constraints create connection. We think that we need to relate to everyone, right? That's kind of a temptation that we have, is like we need to make sure that our messaging and our stories and our examples, like they relate to like the widest group of people. But that's actually not true. What we relate to as humans is specificity. There's a quote from the writer James Joyce, and he says, people would ask him, why do you always write about Dublin? And he said, I always write about Dublin because if I can get to the heart of Dublin, I can get to the heart of any city in the world. And then he said this, he said, in the particular is contained the universal. In the particular is contained the universal. And so what I think is really interesting about what Kieran was saying earlier was he said, hey, we're expected to write letters telling our side of this. We're an advocacy group. But when you write a letter, and don't just say, hey, we support this bill, but you say, hey, here's how this bill is going to hurt my business. Here's a story of a real person who would be impacted if this gets passed, who all of a sudden won't have access to the money that they need. That's a totally different thing for a legislator to see. Because the truth is that the particulars of that story and those constraints create connection. During the pandemic, I was a public speaker. Wouldn't recommend it, honestly. Not a great time to be a public speaker back then. For a reason that you might have already identified, there wasn't any public anymore. We just kind of did away with the public. We said, no, that was an idea. We tried it. No more of that. We're all just going private. And so everybody was stuck in their houses, and we all thought we were going to die, so that was fun too, and there was no toilet paper. So great time to be alive. And I watched my whole business just collapse overnight, and I was so stressed, and I was so anxious, and I was like, I don't know, my whole speaking calendar just gone. And I knew that this is a stressful situation, and that there are a lot of unhealthy ways to turn to in times like that for managing stress, and I didn't want to do that. So I'm like, okay, what's a healthy way to manage this anxiety and this stress? And I looked up and I found this new technique. It's pretty new, maybe in the last 5 or 10 years. So you might have heard of it, you might have not. It's called scrolling. And so what you do is you just take out a cell phone, and then that's pretty much it. You just look at it, and you just gonna go like this, and you can use whatever app you like. You can use TikTok for now. You can use, Reels, which is just TikTok a month later. Whatever it is, and then it just shoots dopamine right into your brain, and all of your problems just go away. I did later find out they do come back, but for a minute, they're gone, and it feels great. And so I was using TikTok, and if you're not familiar with TikTok, you can think of it as it's like cigarettes for your brain. We all know it's taken years off of our life, but it does give you a little buzz when you use it. So I was just chain smoking these TikToks back then. I was just all day long just scrolling. And I would take these funny videos and I would send them to my friends. And most of my friends, they would send funny videos back, or they would haha, laugh react emoji, or they would block my number or whatever. But I had this one friend, Andy, and Andy would go, Kyle, these stories are great, but why aren't you posting on TikTok? You're an idiot and all your projects are stupid and the internet loves stuff like that. I was like, you should think about the way that you talk to people, Andy. But I was like, no, I don't think that they're gonna relate to the stuff that it's so weird. The stuff that I do is so weird. And he was like, I think that they will. And so finally, almost a year into me sending him videos, I finally was like, okay, I'm gonna try it. And I posted my first TikTok. And you know what happened immediately? Nothing. Nothing happened immediately. And that's what'll happen when you post your first TikTok. Thank you for coming. No, that is true. But then I posted my second TikTok. And I don't mean to brag or anything, but I'm now, 2 points makes a line. We're making some progress here. And at this point, I was up to 17 followers. So you could say things are going pretty good. I'm in the double digits, and I'm on my way to the top. And then I posted my third TikTok. My third TikTok was about this photograph. This is my family. I'm obviously the cutest one. I'm in the red striped shirt at the bottom. My brother's on the left in the blue. My cousins are on the sides. My uncles are up top. My mom and dad are in the middle. For reasons that are probably immediately clear to you, my dad hates this picture. Because somehow the photographer tricked only my dad into tilting his head at what I think we can all agree is a 45-degree angle. That's a ridiculous amount to tilt your head in a picture. And they lull you in, don't they? They're like, okay, scoot over. Oh, can you straighten your tie? Sir, can you tilt your head a little? I mean, they just throw it in there. And then this is pre-digital photography. This is 35 years ago, which explains the haircuts, the mustaches, and pretty much everything else about this picture. And so we didn't get to look at it. We traveled 4 hours where our family was to get this picture taken, and then we didn't see a proof or anything, and a month later, this thing gets shipped to our house. And it is huge. I mean, it's this is we paid a lot of money for this thing. It's framed and matted and fancy, and it shows up at my house, and my dad's like, you have got to be kidding me. My dad hates this picture, but my mom loves this picture. And if you're in a relationship, I bet you can guess how that argument ended up. What's that? You guessed? It's still hanging up? Yeah, you're right. This picture has hung in my house for 35 years. It hangs in their dining room. My poor dad has to eat all of his meals with this just looming over him. And it's become an inside joke about how much my dad hates this picture. And so one day we're sitting at dinner, and I'm just all of a sudden like, Kyle, you are an artist. You could fix this. You have Photoshop. And so I snuck into their house when they were out of town. I took the picture off the wall, immediately ran into a roadblock. This is a professionally hung and framed and matted picture, so it's got paper covering the back, so you can't open it up. I razor bladed right through that, no problem. And then took it out, scanned it in, and then I'm like, oh no, what if they realize that I've tampered with this? What if they look at, how sometimes people take the picture off the wall after 35 years just to double check, I was like, no, can't happen to me. So I took it to a frame shop. I had them re-paper paper the back of it, like just to cover my tracks. That's how paranoid I was. And then I put it back up on the wall. I went into Photoshop and I meticulously fixed my dad's head. Ah, right? Yeah, and that's pretty nice. And I was like patting myself on the back, you know. I'm like already practicing my Son of the Year acceptance speech. And I'm like, well, my brothers are out of the will now and it's all mine. So getting pretty excited. But then as I'm looking at this, like I was about to send it off to print to get it framed and matted. And I'm like, there's something just not right about this. Like, I don't know if did I mess up the tie or like, did I, somewhat, like, there's just, it's not there, you know. And then I'm looking, I'm like, oh, I know what it is. You know, it'd be funnier. I took 7.5 hours of Photoshop. I have no regrets about how I spent that time. On my deathbed, if you offered me that time back, I would say, you keep it. That's how I wanted to spend that time. Posted that video to my 17 followers, a video just telling the story that I just told you, and then I went for a walk. And about halfway through my walk, I looked down at my phone, I go, whoa, I have 100 followers, that's crazy. Start walking back, look down at my phone, I go, whoa, I have 1,000 followers. I text Andy, my buddy, who's been telling me this whole time I should be posting, and I was like, Andy, dude, I have this video, it's kind of popping off, I just have 1,000 followers. Put my phone back in my pocket, walk down to my truck, and my phone buzzes, and I look down, and it's Andy, and he goes, what are you talking about? You have 2,000 followers. I get home, and I have 3,000 followers. I go eat dinner at 4,000 followers, put the kids to bed, 5,000 followers. Andy is going nuts right now. He's just like, dude, this is crazy, Kyle. This is exactly what I said was going to happen. You're going viral. I told you. Dude, I told you. And he's like, dude, you're going to hit 10,000 followers by midnight. You're going to hit 10,000 followers by midnight. He was so close. Because at midnight, I had 500,000 followers. And a day later, 25 hours after I posted the video, I had 1 million. I went from 17 followers, not 1,700, not 17,000, 17 individual followers. That's like 2 rows right here, right? That's more than 17. To 1 million, which I think is roughly how many people are in this room. I did that in 25 hours, and I did it by posting like the most specific thing. This weird story about my family and my dad and this portrait. Like, who would have thought that that would resonate so widely? But I think what happened is it's so specific that people were able to put themselves into that story. They go, oh, I've been in family pictures before that I wasn't super stoked about. I've been to Sears Portrait Studio also, you know? And so there's something about the particulars of that story. And the same thing is true of you, that the particulars of being a credit union and how you serve your members and the rules and regulations that differentiate you from the other financial institutions of the world. It's easy to go, no, we're kind of like them, but no, you're not though. And what makes you stand out is the difference that you have. And is that you're owned by your members and that you actually know these people. And like the stories that my mom and dad told me, my mom was a nurse for her entire career. And every car loan that she ever got was through her nurse's credit union. So I grew up hearing those stories and hearing about how different that was from the way that other people did. Those are the stories that are going to connect with people. And it's the constraints of that situation. The fifth reason is that constraints foster collaboration. When you can't just throw more money at a project, oftentimes you end up going, okay, I'll just use my phone a friend. Maybe I'll call my college roommate and say, hey, we've got this problem, and I know you're in a totally different industry, but how would you solve this? Or what's a problem that you face that's sort of like this? Or you talk to your wife or a coworker or somebody else, and you go, help me think through this. And oftentimes that collaboration ends up being mutually beneficial because while you're on the phone, that person says, hey, Wal, I've got you. Here's something that I'm working on. That's why I love events like this, is because everyone in this room does some version of the same thing. But you do it in slightly different places, in slightly different markets, in slightly different ways, which means that like there's a lot of Venn diagram overlap, and then there's also a lot of like edge. And that's where there's a lot of magic, because the thing that's on the edge for you is something that somebody else might need. The thing that you have that they've never experienced before, and vice versa. And so take the time to network at this event and be open and talk to each other about here's what we're wrestling with and here's what we're working on and here's the situation that we're involved in, because that collaboration is really vital. And then the last one is that constraints build resiliency and strength. I'll never forget, I was speaking at a high school once, and this girl comes up to me and she says, would you like to buy a fundraising chocolate for our field hockey team? And I was like, oh, I don't have my wallet. I left it in the car. But while we're here, just tell me about your team. Are you guys any good? She goes, no, we suck. And I was like, I appreciate the honesty. And her friend goes, well, actually, the team is really bad, but she's actually really good. And I was like, is that true? And the girl goes, I'm okay. And her friend goes, shut up. She's the fourth best field hockey goalie in the nation. The fourth best field hockey goalie in the entire nation. And I was like, are you for real? And she's like, yeah. She was super sweet, very humble girl. But I pulled it out of her, and she was. And I Googled it, and it was true. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Like, are you going to college? She's like, yeah, I got a full ride scholarship. I get to go to my dream school. I'm going to go play field hockey in college. And I was like, that's so cool. And I said, it's also so weird that your team is so bad. They not won a single game that entire year. But you're getting a full ride scholarship to college. And she said this thing I'll never forget. She goes, well, Kyle, when your team sucks, you get a lot of opportunities to be a good goalie. I will forget my social security number before I forget that quote, because it's so true. See, there are times that the situation, the constraints that you're in now, they're not winnable. You're not going to be able to get out of the situation the way that you want. But what it is going to do is build some strength in you that you're going to need down the road. And that when things do change and the tide shifts and everything comes back to the way that you want it to be, all of a sudden you'll be in an advantageous position because of the strength and the resiliency that you built during the dark time. So how do we actually do this? Well, I'll move quickly through this, how to work within constraints. The first step is to identify what the constraints actually are, identify the boundaries. Sometimes you can just ask that question, hey, when is this due? What's our budget? What's the timeline? Who's involved in this? Who are the stakeholders? Sometimes you'll get straight answers on that. Sometimes you won't. Sometimes you need, there's always like a woman at every business, like her name's Brenda. She's worked there for longer than anyone can remember. She knows more she is like the heartbeat of that organization. And sometimes you need to talk to her on the side. And you need to go, okay, listen, he said 6 weeks. What's the real timeline? And she'll go, honey, 10 weeks would be great. He'd be thrilled about 10 weeks. Or she might say, actually, if you don't get it done in 4 weeks, you better be looking for a new job. Sometimes you have to read between the lines and figure out what are the actual boundaries, what are the constraints. Sometimes the budget is the budget, and sometimes the budget's not the budget. I found that out when I built a house. I thought the budget was the budget, and the builder had different ideas about what those words meant. So you got to figure out those things. Number 2, figure out which of those boundaries and constraints are constructive and which are constrictive. A constructive constraint, every constraint limits the output of a project, but constructive constraints do it in a positive way. So if we were to say, hey, let's all brainstorm a new car, let's build a car together, let's just dream it up. A constructive constraint would be, how wide is a lane of traffic? We should probably make sure our car fits inside of a lane of traffic, right? How tall is that little flippy sign at McDonald's so if you want to get ice cream, you don't hit that, right? Because people want to get ice cream. What are the constraints of that? What sort of safety regulations? What are the emissions laws? These things that, yeah, they limit us. We can't just make whatever we want, but they do it in a beneficial way. And a constrictive constraint would be saying well, I don't know, I like pink. Let's make the car pink. Well, have we done any market research on which colors are popular? Or let's make it look like a cat. We've never seen a car that looks like a cat before, right? And those things sneak their way into every project. And as a leader, you have to be able to identify those things and say, hey, you know what? Let's table that for now, or let's make the argument to the ultimate decision maker of why we should maybe hold off on this. Sometimes that's a name or a logo or a preference or something like that, and go, hey, can we remove those things? Then you got to look for the gaps. Once you figured out what the actual hard lines are, that's when the creativity comes into play, because oftentimes we assume, well, there's a wall here, there must be a corner here. But that might not be true. Maybe there's a rounded corner. Maybe there's a whole other room back here. Maybe the wall stops halfway down and there's a gap here where we could do something interesting. When you start to look for the gaps and figure out where are the hard gaps and where are the soft gaps, sometimes there is a boundary. And the boss says, hey, if we don't get it done, we have to get it done in 6 weeks. And then you go, what happens if we get it done in 7 weeks? And they go, nothing really. Well, I'll be a little bit grumpy. Oh, okay, well, I'm fine with that. You're a little bit grumpy most of the time, right? So, and sometimes it's, well, there's a 1% penalty or there's a 5% penalty, and it escalates. And you have to decide, okay, well, where are the gaps? Which ones am I comfortable pushing against? And that's where the hidden solutions come into play. But we only find the hidden solutions when we do all of those other steps up front. When the Apollo 13 mission started to go bad, spoiler alert's coming, but this was 70 years ago, so you've had time to catch up on the story. But when they started realizing there was stuff going wrong, one of the first things that NASA did was put together a list on the ground of what do they have up there. What are the things that they have access to? Because, okay, we know that this equipment's damaged, this is broken, we got to get these guys home. What's our best chance of doing that? And if we go, okay, you're going to need those whirlybird hats. You got one of those? They're like, where would we get one of those, right? So NASA said, here's what they have. They've got these tools. They have these materials. But then they got creative and said, okay, they also have these like flight manuals. Well, it's mostly paper, but the cover of each flight manual is cardstock. Could we use that? Okay, great. And then they put these kits together. They locked scientists in a room, and they said, you can come out when you figure out how to save those people's lives. They only were able to do it, though, when they started with, here are the constraints of what we have. A few helpful questions to ask along the way. Number one is, what game could we win? Sometimes you're put into a situation like the lacrosse girl where you're like, or field hockey, where I can't win this situation. Okay, well, what game could we win down in the future? What's a thing that we could do, view this problem in a different way that would set us up for something else? I was working at a summer camp one time, and it was my last year as a summer camp counselor because I was getting married that fall. And I'd been with this group of kids. They were freshmen in high school when they started, and they were seniors now. They were all going out and graduating. I was getting married. It was like our last week together. It was this big final hurrah. And there was this game that they did at this camp where they would give every team a bag of the same materials, popsicle sticks, glue, pipe cleaners, things like that. And they would say, make a bridge out of this. And the bridge has to span this gap. And then on the last day, we'll bring everyone's bridge up. We'll test it. Whoever's bridge holds the most weight wins. And when they gave us that, and I knew it was our last time together, I got my team together in a huddle, and I said, guys, I've got an idea. I just want you to know if we do this idea, we will lose. But I think it'll be funny. And so I pitched them the idea, and they were like, we have to do it. And so instead of building a bridge, we spent 3 days building a tiny refrigerator out of popsicle sticks and glue. And it was like ornate. It was a little arts and craftsy, but it was like all nice. It was a freezer compartment. There was a regular, fridge compartment. Somebody made a little egg tray that they like whittled divots into a popsicle stick. It was like legit. And then we covered it with a blanket. And we hid it for 3 days. And then we brought it into the room. And it was a room like this, just packed with all these people, teenagers going crazy. And then each team would come up one at a time onto the stage, and they would say, bring up your bridge. And so they said, okay, red team, bring up your bridge. And green team, and we were the black team. They said, black team, bring up your bridge. And when they said that, we in unison, we'd been practicing this for 3 days. They said, bring up your bridge. And we all went, bridge? We thought you said fridge. I promise you way more people laughed in this room than laughed in that room. It was, you could have heard a pin drop. Everyone was like, what? I mean, we thought it was very funny. We were laughing very hard. Nobody else thought it was funny. And we bring it up, we unveil it, and there's this tiny refrigerator, and the whole crowd is so confused about what's happening right now. And we are dying laughing, and we lay the bridge down sideways, or the fridge, and it still like spanned the gap. They put the first weight on it, it cracked in half, fell to the ground. Our team just goes nuts. We're like high-fiving and stuff. Yeah, we lost that camp. But here's the thing. That was 16 years ago. And all those people, they're not kids anymore. Most of them have kids. They've got wives and families and receding hairlines and all the things that come. And they've spread out all over the country. And those kids are now grown-ups who are my friends. And I could text any one of those kids. And I could text them one word, bridge with a question mark. And sometime in the next 24 hours, I'm going to get a text back that just says, I thought you said fridge. See, we decided in that moment, hey, we've won this camp, we've lost this camp. That's not really what's important. What's important for us now is to make one last memory together, to create something here that we'll always be able to tie back to. So sometimes a good question is, what game could we win? Number two is, how could we use this differently? Is there an alternate use for this thing that we have? Are there supplies that we have or is there excess? Maybe it's not capital, but maybe it's team. Maybe it's, there's a team that's just not doing as much as they normally do. They got pulled off a project. Can we borrow them for a minute? Can we use a story in a different way? Can we use this resource in some other different way? What did other industries do here? Sometimes we get so myopic and focused on the credit union industry or even the financial services industry, and we forget that other people have solved problems too. And maybe they solved a similar problem, but in a different way. So you might need to abstract it out a layer, and then you might need to go, okay, how would I do this if I wasn't marketing this particular product, but if I was marketing shoes, or if I was marketing t-shirts, if I was marketing some other thing? How do we convince people to do anything, right? Not just how do I convince an 18-year-old to make their first account at a credit union. Number four, is this a constraint or an excuse? This is a tough one, because a lot of times we have a valid, legitimate constraint that is limiting our output, but then we just extrapolate that out and go, well, because of this, and then we can't do any of this. It's like, no. Because of this, we can't do this, but we can still do all of this other stuff over here. A few years ago, I wrote this book, and it's a very silly children's book about a pizza that destroys the universe. And I ended up on a panel at this library conference. And it was a virtual panel. It was during the pandemic. And everyone logs on. It's me and my illustrator for the book, and then all these other people. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. None of them brought their illustrators. I'm like, that's weird. And then the panel starts, and I realized why none of them brought their illustrators is because none of them are children's books. I am like this silly children's book. Every other book is the most serious book that you've ever heard of in your life. And I'm not joking you. There was a novel about a school shooting. There was a book about a woman struggles with borderline personality disorder. There was a story about this girl who was an illegal, undocumented immigrant and came to the United States. And then there's my story about a pizza that destroys the universe. And like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, how did I get put on this panel? Like, I'm so sorry for even existing right now. And I met this woman on this panel, and I emailed her afterwards. I was like, hey, I just want to say I'm so sorry. Your book sounds awesome. My book is stupid. Thank you for not being weird about that. And she was like super nice. We've become friends. This is her. Her name's Chinjuli Wang. And she was an undocumented immigrant from China. She came over when she was like 5 or 6 years old, lived in the United States, worked in like sweatshop conditions in New York. There's a story in the book about her arms being purple from processing ice, like fish in ice baths underground in New York City, and then having to go to school the next day. And she wrote this book called Beautiful Country, and now she's like an amazing high-powered lawyer. She works for underprivileged kids. She clerked for Supreme Court Justice. This book is amazing. It came out, it was an instant New York Times bestseller. It was on Barack Obama's book reading list, like New York Times bestseller, on the Today Show, like all this kind of stuff. And I tell this story because a lot of times when you're on panels like that, people will reach out to you and they'll go, oh, what a cool story. You got this book published. And then they'll tell you, oh, I've always wanted to write a book, but here's why I haven't done it. And I would advise you not to do that. For one thing, like, I don't tell you guys why I don't work at a credit union. You know, people make different choices. You have yours and I have mine. And so, but when you're an author, people will always tell you, here's why I'm not an author. Oh, I've always wanted to write a book, but. And one of the excuses that I got one time was this girl texted me or DM'd me on Instagram, and she said, hey, I've always wanted to write a book, and this is so inspiring, but I don't have a dedicated computer. I share this one computer with all my family, and it's in a busy spot. And I was like, well, hey, good news, actually. Books were before computers, so you can make them without one of those. We've been doing it for a long time. And then also, you have a phone. Like, you're DMing me on a phone, so like there's a notes app on your phone, there's other stuff. And I was like, I know it's not ideal. And she was like, nobody writes a book on a phone. And I told her this story. Because the first draft of this book, this amazing, world-changing, New York Times bestselling book, was written on her phone on the subway at New York City while she commuted to and from her law job. I can't think of a worse writing situation than that. But sometimes you go, is this a constraint or is it an excuse? You say, let's keep the constraint where it is, and let's get rid of the excuse. I'm going to skip over this for time. I want to close with a story that I started to tell earlier. I mentioned this story where we had $23,098, 592 backers, over 1,000 runners. Well, during the pandemic, we decided, like, what if we did this again? Like, everyone's stuck at home. Everyone's kind of scary at the beginning of the pandemic, and so we're like, let's give people a thing to take their minds off of it. And like last time we had 1,000 runners, what if we could get 5,000 or 10,000 runners? And so we put this up, and we just slightly overshot our goal. We ended up with 34,477. Oh, sorry, that should be, there we go. And I don't know what you're wondering. Kyle, does that make you bigger than the Boston Marathon? And the answer is yes, it does. And I would love to tell you about all the amazing stuff that happened, but I would rather just show you a video. This is a video I posted the day after the race.
Yesterday was a day I will never forget, thanks to 34,477 TikTokers who pretended to run a marathon that didn't actually exist. Here's how it happened. Back in 2013, I had this friend who was always bragging about running marathons. So just to mess with him, I made up a fake marathon with a bunch of my friends, and we ended up in Runner's World magazine. Then a few weeks ago, I posted a TikTok about it, and 34,477 of you were like, let's do that again. We printed out fake running bibs, pretended to stretch out, and took pictures and video of ourselves pretending to run.
You can do it, Greta! You're almost done!
I know the internet can be a cesspool of negativity sometimes, but it's stuff like this that reminds me of how great it can be too. Yesterday was this incredibly fun day of watching people all over the world take this silly spark of an idea and bring it to life with their own unbridled creativity and joy. You guys made fake aid stations and even set up fake medical stops, which was good because there turned out to be a lot of fake injuries. You even simulated multiple fake finish lines. It was magnificent. I was a big fan of TikTok already, but yesterday was proof of what can happen when we use this platform for maximum chaotic good. So if that sounds like something you're into, hit that follow button because we are just getting started.
I will never forget that day. It was one of the craziest days of my life. My work was kind of done ahead of time. Like, I put this thing out into the world. I sent out the t-shirts and the race bibs and the instructions, and then it's like, It's out of my hand. This thing is going to do whatever it's going to do. And all day long, people would post these funny videos, and I would think like, well, that's it. That's the best one. No one's going to be able to top that. And then 5 minutes later, someone would post something even funnier. 34,477 people. That's a lot of people. And they were like riffing off each other's ideas, and there were these like fake rivalries that were developing, and people would stitch each other's videos, and like these trends would develop. Like people would set up these aid stations where they'd pour out 100 cups of water for a fake marathon. And then they would knock half of them over, because that's what happens at a marathon. I guess people are running, they're knocking the cups over. People made their kids hold up signs that said like, go mom and dad. Like, I know there's gonna be kids in therapy about that later. I'm gonna be like, I have this memory, but it doesn't make sense because my parents weren't runners. Like, that's my bad, that's on me. The ambulance guy, like, is this off-duty paramedic. He opened the doors of his ambulance. He printed out our logo. I don't even know where he got our logo. He found it somewhere and printed out this high-res version of our logo. But the best part of that was at the bottom of his sign, it said, EMS stop number 2. So in his mind, he's created this whole fictional universe where there's another ambulance somewhere else on the route. But if I'm honest with you, I expected all the meaningful, or the heartfelt stuff, or the joyful stuff, excuse me. I expected all the funny stuff. I didn't expect the heartfelt stuff. I didn't expect the meaningful stuff. I don't know if you guys remember lockdown, or if your brain has just like kind of trauma blocked that out, and you're like, nope, I have a black hole for like a year. But man, was that a scary time. For me, I mentioned this, I watched my entire business evaporate overnight. I went from like, I had so much career momentum and this trajectory, and I was like, this was gonna be my year. And then I went from that to being like, I don't know how I'm gonna pay the bills next month. And every day my wife would be like, babe, are we gonna be okay? And I would look at her straight in the eyes and just lie. And I would go, yeah, it's gonna be fine, we're gonna be fine. And then I would go to my office and I would put my head in my hands for like 8 hours. And I would just go like, I don't know what to do. It was so scary. And I didn't know if I was gonna like be homeless in 2 years. I didn't know if I was gonna be like killing deer with a stick in the woods because civilization collapsed. There's no toilet paper anymore. Like, I have no idea. And in the middle of that, we did this project, and it was like this moment of levity. And I got so many messages from people who said, Kyle, I haven't realized how heavy everything felt until today when it didn't feel that way for a second. Like, it felt like this is the first time I've been able to take in a full breath for a while. There was a video in there, I don't know if you caught it, it was like a half-second clip in this montage of a mom and 2 little kids, and they're standing in their living room, and they're just like, they've got their race t-shirts on, they've got bibs, they've got like sweatbands and stuff, and they're just like going like this, and just ear-to-ear grins. Like, every one of them is just like smiling, as big a smile as you can smile. Just total unbridled joy. But if you look closely at that video, there's a mom and there's 2 kids, and the kid right here on the right in the video is bald, because that kid has leukemia. And the mom sent me this message, and she said, Kyle, every day I'm a mom of a kid with leukemia, and nobody really tells you how to do that. There's not like a handbook that they give you. Whatever you do, you're pretty sure you're doing it wrong, because every day your kid asks if everything's gonna be okay, and you say it is, and you don't know if that's true. And every day you have to pretend like you're strong, and you're not. And she said, Kyle, every day I'm a mom of a kid with leukemia, but today for just a minute, I was just a mom. And she said, that was a gift that you gave me. And I was like, lady, I was just trying to mess with my buddy. See, the truth is the ideas that you have, these crazy ideas that you build within constrained environments, they're not for you. And they're not even for the people that you think they're for. They're like a rock that you just toss out into the lake, and it sends these ripples out that oftentimes go farther than you would ever imagine, and they impact people that not only would you not imagine them impacting, but they impact people that you'll never even have a chance to meet. The things that you do, like the services that you provide in your community, it's not just ones and zeros moving around. It's like hopes and dreams. You're allowing people to like buy their first house and get approved for a loan when everyone else told them no, and like have transportation that takes them to work and fund these projects and these dreams that they have. Like, that's the work that you're doing, and ultimately it can end up looking like a bunch of ones and zeros, but that's the dreams that you guys are enabling. I'll close with this quote from George Bernard Shaw. He says, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Everything that's ever pushed us forward in a society, in financial services industries, I mean, I look back at that timeline that you showed of, here's this desk in a basement with a lockbox, that was a credit union. And that was because somebody saw the way that the world was at the time, and they were like, that's not bad. It's not a bad start. But they had an idea for a way that it could be better. And they didn't bury that idea in their head or their heart, but they put it out into the world, and they boldly chased after it, and they made that idea a reality. Or to put it another way, to quote Peter Diamandis, the founder of the X Prize, he said, "The day before something is a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea." I am over my time. You've been a phenomenal audience. Thank you so much for your time.